All right, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're going deep, like really deep, into a historical puzzle, a real head scratcher.
Mm.
We're talking about the early Jesuits in Spain, those folks, and their complicated relationship with conversos, people of Jewish ancestry, and our main guidebook for this journey, the book The Jesuit Order as Synagogue of Jews. Catchy title, right?
Yeah, it grab you. And right off the bat, what's so intriguing, what we really got to untangle, is this seeming contradiction. I mean, can you picture this? The Society of Jesus pops up in 16th century Spain, right?
Yeah.
A time when everyone's super focused, almost obsessed
Yeah.
with limpieza de sangre, purity of blood. Like, it's a big deal. But here's the kicker. This very order, those Jesuits in those early years, they seem pretty open to guys with, well, Jewish heritage, joining their club. That's the puzzle, the big question mark hanging over everything. How's that even possible?
No kidding. Like, how do you reconcile those two things? I mean, it seems almost, I don't know, paradoxical, doesn't it? You've got this hardcore Catholic order popping up when everyone's scrutinizing family trees, but they're welcoming folks with Jewish roots, at least at first. Wild. Before we go any further, though, let's break down this whole limpieza de sangre thing. What exactly did it mean back then in Spain?
So at its heart, limpieza de sangre was all about genealogy. It was like a system for categorizing people. Even if Jewish folks converted to Christianity, they and their kids, their grandkids, they were always labeled with that Jewish ancestry. It wasn't just a history lesson, though. It was a ticket to discrimination. No matter how sincere their new faith was, the idea was that Jewish blood, it was like a stain that couldn't be washed out, passed down through generations. It speaks to that deep-seated fear of anything different, the other, and how tough it is to truly accept those who don't fit the mold.
And this wasn't just some unspoken social bias, right? It was written into law.
Exactly. We see early signs of this with the Statutum contra Hebreos in 1497, a law aimed specifically at people of Hebrew descent, put in place by the San Antonio de Sigüenza College. And of course, the big game changers were those expulsions of Jews, first from Spain in 1492, then Portugal in 1497. It's striking, as historian Julio Caro Baroja pointed out, that even later, when folks wrote about this time, they'd use Jews and conversos like they were the same thing. Shows you that this whole bloodline connection, it stuck even after conversion.
So what's the backstory? Why this huge focus on purity of blood in Spain? It feels very, I don't know, Iberian Peninsula specific, doesn't it?
Yeah, the book digs into that, unraveling a bunch of historical threads, going way back to the Visigoths even, and definitely getting more intense after the Muslims showed up in 711. The whole conversos situation, whether they fit in or not, it became a real sticking point.
Uh-huh.
For those Spanish monarchs trying to create a unified Catholic Spain, conversos were a question mark. Could they be trusted? Were they truly Catholic?
Yeah.
It wasn't just about religion either. It got tangled up with the idea of being Spanish, who was truly one of them.
And like with any big social movement, there were folks fanning the flames and others trying to put them out, voices on both sides of this anti-converso sentiment.
Absolutely. Early on, we've got figures like Mayor Sarmiento, big player in the Sentencia Estatuto of 1449, a key anti-converso law in Toledo. Then later, Archbishop Silicio in 1547, this Estatutos de Limpieza, and Bishop Diego de Simancas in 1573, fiercely defending that Toledan statute. They were the pro-discrimination team, their arguments. Conversos weren't really converted. They were faking it, secretly keeping their Jewish practices. They just didn't trust them, plain and simple.
But it's so interesting that there was this, intellectual resistance to this discrimination, people pushing back.
Right. And the book spotlights some real heavy hitters who challenge those discriminatory ideas. We've got Bishop Alonso de Cartagena with his Defensorium Unitatis Christianae, written around 1449-50, and Fray Alonso de Oropesa with his Lumen ad Revelationem Gentium from 1450-66. Both made powerful arguments for the unity of the Christian faith, that it didn't matter if you came from Jewish or Gentile roots. Everyone was redeemed through Christ, part of the same family, God's family. It's a good reminder that even in a society that looks all uniform on the surface, you've got different viewpoints, people challenging the norm.
It's funny, though, that even those supporting conversos, they didn't always agree on how to deal with the Jewish community as a whole, the ones who hadn't converted.
Right, that's a key detail. So both Cartagena and Oropesa, they were all for conversos being accepted in Christian society. But their views on the Jewish community, those who hadn't made the switch, they were different. Cartagena saw unconverted Jews as a potential problem. He thought they might tempt conversos back to Judaism, so they needed to hear about Christ fulfilling those Jewish prophecies, get them on board. Oropesa, on the other hand, he was more about separation, keeping Christians and Jews apart. He even suggested the church and the government should step in, limit contact. So even within the pro-converso camp, there were different approaches to this whole tangled mess.
let's dig a bit deeper into that Toledan law from 1449. What were their reasons for such a discriminatory thing? What were they thinking?
Well, the city council in Toledo, they came up with a bunch of justifications. Some of them sound pretty out there today. They claimed conversos had this long history of plotting against old Christians, going back centuries, even saying their Jewish ancestors teamed up with the Muslims when they invaded. They even accused conversos of stealing royal funds to, get this, oppress old Christians, and said they were sneaking into government positions to undermine the Christian order. It's like a textbook case of suspicion and paranoia, taken to the extreme.
And Cartagena, he wasn't having any of it, right? He really
Right.
went after them for this law.
Oh, he went full-on attack mode. He saw those statutes written by Garcia de Mora, the basis for the Toledan law, as a direct violation of God's law, practically heresy. He argued they completely went against the unity of the Christian faith, something he was super passionate about. His opposition just shows you how split Spanish society was back then on this whole converso issue.
The book also talks about the Pope getting involved in this whole debate, right? What was that about?
Yeah, Bishop Nicholas V, he issued a papal bull in 1449 that people used to fight against those anti-converso laws. But then later, Diego de Simancas, he tried to discredit that bull, questioned if it was even legit. And the thing is, the Pope's position wasn't always clear-cut. Later on, Pope Paul IV in 1555, he actually approved those stricter rules from Archbishop Cilicio with the Bull Cum Nimis Absurdum, totally different from an earlier, more chill bull, Cupientes y Dios, from Pope Paul III in 1542, which let Jewish converts keep their stuff after baptism. So even at the top of the church, no one could agree on this.
It was a real mixed bag, that's for sure. Now let's talk about those early Jesuits. In this crazy atmosphere of suspicion and discrimination, their view on conversos seems almost revolutionary, going against the grain. The book even quotes them saying, "We Jesuits take pleasure in admitting those of Jewish ancestry." Pretty bold statement for that time.
Super bold, and they didn't just talk the talk. If you look at the early Jesuits, there were tons of guys with confirmed or likely converso backgrounds in important positions. Clearly, talent and dedication to their mission trumped any worries about bloodlines.
So who are some of these big shot conversos in the early Jesuit order?
Oh, there's Diego Lainez, a huge name. He was the second superior general, taking over after Ignatius of Loyola himself. His family, they likely had converso roots in Almazan. Then there's Alfonso Salmeron, super tight with Lainez, big player of the Council of Trent, and the first provincial of Naples. He was known for sticking up for conversos within the order. And Pedro Rivadeneira, can't forget him. He was a major Jesuit historian and writer, shaped how people saw the order early on. He also came from a converso family in Toledo. Interestingly, Loyola himself told Juan Alfonso de Polanco, another big name we'll get to keep an eye on Rivadeneira's work, kind of oversee him.
And this Juan Alfonso de Polanco, he seems like a key figure in all of this.
Oh, he's central to the story. He was Loyola's right-hand man, his personal secretary. A lot of historians think he was like the head honcho of the converso crew within the early Jesuits. He was given some massive jobs, like translating the Jesuit constitutions into Latin, not a walk in the park. And he was even asked to write a whole guide for Jesuit confessors called the Brevet Directorium. You've got others like Antonio Arauz, who started out anti-converso, believe it or not, but changed his tune later. And then there's Francisco de Toledo Herrera. Everyone knew he had Jewish blood. His grandpa was even put on trial for, secretly practicing Judaism. And his grandma and great-grandparents, they were burned at the stake. But he became a respected Jesuit, even defended Archbishop Carranza, who also had converso roots. And lastly, there's Gaspar Hernandez. He became the rector of that fancy college of Naples and went with Francisco de Borja on his last trip to the Iberian Peninsula. Shows they really trusted him.
Okay, so what did Loyola himself actually do? What policies did he put in place that showed this open attitude towards conversos?
Loyola did a few key things that really showed his inclusive side. He famously set up the House of Catechumens in Rome, a place specifically for Jewish converts to learn about Christianity and get support. There's also a story in the book, a really powerful one, about a Jewish man in prison whose family ends up converting thanks to Loyola stepping in and helping them out. But bigger picture, Loyola's rules about letting new Christians into the society, they were all about being careful, being discerning, but not saying no right away just because of their family tree. He wanted them to look at the person, their character, their calling, whether they were a good fit for the Jesuit mission. He even said straight up, don't get hung up on a guy's racial background. And the fact that he put so many conversos in charge gave them real power, shows he believed in them, ignored those societal prejudices. That's a leader whose values shape a whole organization.
But not everyone in the society was on board with this open-door policy, right? There must have been some pushback, some internal squabbles.
You got it. It wasn't all sunshine and roses. Simon Rodriguez, he was the top dog in Portugal, one of Loyola's original buddies. He actually told his guys not to let any new Christians in. Ironic, because he ended up letting some in himself. Then there's Geronimo Nadal, a real complicated case. His secretary, Pedro de Benanera's cousin, said he was totally against anyone with Jewish ancestry. But if you look at what actually happened, Nadal did let conversos into the society. And get this, some folks even think Nadal himself might have had converso roots, based on his background in Mallorca and ties to the Chueta community, those descendants of converted Jews there. So even within the Jesuits, there was this back and forth, struggling with this issue.
So despite these internal debates, it sounds like Loyola's basic policy, not discriminating, was a core value in those early years.
It really was.
Yeah.
And the book points to a crucial moment. The guys of the First General Congregation, that's the top decision-making body of the society, they made it clear that the constitutions, basically the Jesuit rule book, mostly written by Loyola, should be changed on this.
Yeah.
They were basically saying Loyola's vision was divinely inspired, hands-off. This solidified that inclusive approach at the highest level.
That early period of openness is really remarkable, considering what was going on in society at large. But things changed, right? After Francisco de Borja, the third superior general, died in 1572, things took a turn. What happened?
Yeah, Borgia's death was a turning point. After that, you see this rise in anti-converso feelings, more organized lobbying within the society to push conversos out of the picture. And then there's the election of Everard Mercurian as a fourth superior general. That was a big one. Juan Alfonso de Polanco, remember him, the converso leader. He was also in the running, but he lost. Mercurian, he wasn't a converso, and he wasn't exactly a champion for them either. This election was a sign of the times. Things were changing. It shows you how a change in leadership can totally shift an organization's priorities, even its culture.
And Mercurian, he wasted no time changing things up, did he?
Nope, he got right to it. Almost as soon as he got elected, Mercurian started what the book calls a house cleansing. Not a very subtle term, is it? He started removing converso Jesuits from any important positions, in government, in administration, in Rome, Italy, probably all over Europe. That was the end of the converso power era, which was a big part of Loyola's time and the guys who came after him.
And this all led to that discriminatory law in 1593, which sounds like a complete 180 from those early days. What did it say exactly?
That 1593 decree, that was the big one. It officially, explicitly said, no more people with Jewish ancestry allowed in the Society of Jesus, period. And it went even further. It said any conversos already in, if they hadn't taken their final vows, they were out. That made discrimination official, based on nothing but your family tree, totally reversed what Loyola had set up.
So who were the main players pushing for this anti-converso policy? Who was behind it all?
There were a few key individuals and groups. Benedetto Palmio, a Jesuit, he was a loud voice against converso influence in the society. Then you've got the Portuguese Jesuits, backed by King Sebastian of Portugal. They were also lobbying hard to exclude new Christians. Palmio even wrote these detailed reports about how awful new Christians were, focusing on those old accusations that they were secretly practicing Judaism or Islam, keeping their old faith hidden. They played on those deep-seated societal fears and prejudices.
But like before, there were people pushing back, right?
Yeah.
Trying to fight this discrimination. The book mentions a group called the Memorialistas.
Yeah, there was a whole pro-converso resistance movement going on. The Memorialistas, that's what they were called. They wanted to reform the Spanish Jesuit provinces from the inside, give them more independence from Rome. This group included some conversos, guys like Dionisio Vasquez and Enriquez fighting against those discriminatory policies. And then there's Antonio Posavino, a real outspoken critic of this whole purity of blood nonsense. He said, fearing converso Jesuits went against God's will and the whole foundation of the society. Diego de Guzman also wrote a strong pro-converso letter, pointing out how unfair it was to kick someone out just because of their family history. He emphasized how much conversos had already done for the order, and he pointed out that other religious orders didn't have these crazy exclusionary rules.
And there's Garcia Giron de Alarcón. He puts together a really detailed argument against this decree.
Oh yeah, Alarcon's arguments were super thorough, well-researched. He quoted all sorts of big names, church fathers, papal statements, even the Jesuit constitutions themselves, to show that excluding people based on ancestry was wrong and went against the whole idea of Christian equality after baptism. He also brought up practical concerns, like how those genealogy investigations were unreliable and open to abuse. His arguments were like a powerful intellectual counterattack against this wave of discrimination.
So what does the book say about why they actually put this discriminatory policy in place? Was it all about religion, or was there something else going on?
If you look at letters from Claudio Acquaviva, who became superior general in 1581, you see that politics played a big role. It seems like they wanted to keep the Spanish court and the Inquisition, those powerful institutions, happy. So external pressures, political pressures, were a big factor in the Jesuits changing their internal policies. It just goes to show, even religious groups aren't immune to the political realities of the time.
So, to sum up this complicated history, the early Jesuits really changed their tune on conversos, didn't they?
For sure. They started out pretty open and welcoming under Loyola, Lainez, and Borgia. Conversos had important roles, they were trusted, but then things shifted. You get more and more anti-converso feelings, organized efforts to push them out, culminating in that official discriminatory law in 1593. Quite a journey.
It's amazing to see how it all unfolded, how religious beliefs, social pressure with that whole limpieza de sangre thing, and the internal politics of the Jesuits all played a part.
It's clear from the historical records that there was a real internal battle within the society about this Jewish question. Big names on both sides. That 1593 decree, that was a major turning point. But the decades before that, it's not a simple story of everyone being against conversos right from the start. It's much more nuanced, more complex than that.
Makes you think about how social and political stuff can shape even deeply religious organizations, and what happens when you choose exclusion over inclusion. This deep dive into the early Jesuits gives us a powerful historical lens to look at these questions of identity, belonging, and discrimination, things that are still relevant today. Thanks for walking us through this fascinating history.
Happy to do it.
And for you listening, here's something to chew on. As we've gone through this historical episode, have you seen any parallels with today's debates about identity, inclusion, and the role of historical biases? It's a question worth thinking about. Catch you next time for another deep dive.